WICR.
All right, folks, welcome back for our second segment of the day of The Rock is On. We finished talking about the Yankees and how they had a successful April, and they're on top of the AL East. Now we make our way towards Queens, and we talk about the New York Mets. And heading into this season, they've had lofty expectations of winning a World Series. They have everything in line, pitching rotation, great lineup. Somewhat of a shaky bullpen, but you know what? You figured once Familia came back after his suspension, they would turn it around there. But you know what? April so far for the Mets have just been flat out terrible. It's been abysmal. It's been a nightmarish, any negative term you want to describe, any negative term you want to say, that's a perfect term to describe the Mets season so far in April. They're so far 10-14, last in the National League East, 6.5 games behind the Nationals. They rival the Nationals. And you know what? With the Mets, I think it's just more of a combination of just bad luck and just inconsistency. And I'll start off with the inconsistency. Their bullpen, and I've stretched it every time I bash the Mets. Majority of their time, it's always going to be about their bullpen. The Mets bullpen is just in complete disarray. Honestly, even when Familia came back, though, and I understand you can say he's shaky, though. He's getting his feet wet for the season. Okay, but you know what? It's just he hasn't made enough strides in thinking that he can be a consistent closer for this team day in and day out. And that's been a problem. And that's been a problem for the Mets for as long as I can remember. Even back when they were somewhat relevant, like 2007, 2008, when they had those late season collapses. The Mets bullpen, or even the World Series in 2015 against the Royals, the Mets bullpen has always been abysmal. It's always given every Met fan agita and heartache. And you know what? It's just it's like that song, this is the song that never ends. That's the Mets bullpen. It goes on and on, my friends. Honestly, it's like the Mets, the only closers, honestly, that the Mets had that I thought were pretty much lights out was when they had Billy Wagner and John Franco. When they had Armando Benitez, he was a flamethrower, but you know what? He had his inconsistencies as well. But those guys, John Franco and Billy Wagner, those guys seemed like they were lights out. Like nobody was going to hit off those guys. Nobody. And the Mets don't have that. They don't have like that closer or that relief pitcher where the opposition's like, oh no, oh great, we got to face this guy now. They don't. And the Mets bullpen for years have always let this team down, and it's been a main Achilles heel for them. Main Achilles heel, without a doubt. But that's one reason why the Mets have been struggling in April. And the next is their whole team, all their pitchers as a team. The Mets have a 4.53 ERA after the first month of the season. So that means they're giving up nearly, or just a smidge over 4 or 5 runs a game. And this is a team that's supposed to be built on pitching, having guys throwing in the high 90s, high velocity, with a mixture of other pitches. It hasn't been working out so far. DeGrom hasn't looked dominant. Harvey has made some strides, needless to say. So it's been a plus for him. But you know what? Syndergaard hasn't done a whole lot, and he got hurt yesterday, and he's out with a torn muscle in his right arm. And he's probably not going to be back till like maybe late July, early August, as you hope. And then you still have Steven Matz, who's still on the disabled list with bone chips in his elbow, and then Lugo, a guy who was supposed to be their 5th starter or their guy coming out of the bullpen, pitching long innings. He's out. So, and then, like I said earlier, with bad luck and injuries, though, you have your best pitcher, Noah Syndergaard, or Thor, getting hurt, being placed on the DL. And then you have your best hitter and Yoenis Cespedes, the guy who pretty much makes the lineup go, he's out with a hamstring. And you don't know when he's going to be back. So, you talk about a double whammy for the Mets. When you have your best pitcher and your best hitter, two guys who are indispensable and you could not afford to lose, go out in the same month, and it's the first month of the year. When you have 5 months to go and just about 140 something games, just about somewhere around there, or just a smidge under 140. And then as a team, the bats have just been so anemic too. It's like when Cespedes is taken out of this lineup, the Mets bats are dead. They're dead. They just laid. It seems like with this team, you take Cespedes out of the lineup, they just lay down and die. And it's been evident. Even back in 2015, before they made the trade for him, they struggled to score runs or manufacture runs. If this team had scored 4 or 5 runs without Cespedes, or this was before Cespedes, if this team had scored 4 or 5 runs, that was an accomplishment. Because the Mets have always been, not always, but in recent years, have just always been mediocre and just abysmal at the plate when it comes to manufacturing runs. They're one of the worst teams in generating RBIs in the last few years, before Cespedes came. Because then we all know when they traded for him, the Mets became a juggernaut on offense. But so far, hitting .217 as a team. And you know what? The only guys who pretty much, and if you watch the Mets, or keep up with the Mets, the only guys that have been pretty consistent and been tearing the cover off the ball have been Michael Conforto, who Terry Collins did not put in the lineup at the beginning of the year, and I think he should be an everyday player, and Jay Bruce, who's reemerged himself and redeemed himself after last year's shaky start with the Mets, after he got traded from the Reds. Those are the only two guys that are hitting. Everybody else is just doing a flat-out awful job and is not producing. And I'm telling you, the Mets season, their ship is sinking right now. As crazy as that may seem, or for me to say that on May 1st, that your season's already in jeopardy, it pretty much is at this point. And the Mets are, it's sinking, but you know what? They're in the middle, and it can only go one or two ways. You can either float back up, or you can sink to the bottom. And for a team that's supposed to have World Series aspirations and supposed to win a World Series and had the pedigree to win it all, as of now, it doesn't look that way. And as a Met fan, you gotta feel really pessimistic. Because you don't know how this team is going to respond or where this team is going to be come 4th of July. Because you know what? If the Mets are behind in the division or way back in the standings by 4th of July, you can kiss any aspirations of winning a World Series or even just getting to the playoffs goodbye. Now, the only optimistic thing as a Met fan is that, hey, they've been through this situation before where they were down, they were out of first place, they had to come back and win or just to make the playoffs or win the division. We've seen that before, late in the year, where we thought, hey, it's just going to be another lost season. We've seen the Mets come back and make late season pushes. Maybe this is another late season push for the Mets. Maybe they can redeem it themselves. But you know what? They have to redeem themselves now, and they have to do it sooner than later. Otherwise, this is going to be a lost season. And the 2017 Mets would be underachievers if they don't turn things around this year. But, the good thing about baseball is that it's 6 months. So even if you do bad your first month or the first 2 months, you still have a long way to go. And the Mets do have 5 months and a long way to go. And as a fan, you just hope that they can just turn things around and have a phenomenal May or even a phenomenal June, and that come the All-Star break, they're in a good position. I think that's the only thing you can feel somewhat optimistic about is that, hey, it's only April. It's only a month. But then again, it's like, the ship is, like I said, the ship is sinking, and it could either sink to the bottom or float back up. And that's up to Terry Collins and the Mets players to decide. And with that, that concludes this second segment.